All right. Well, given that it's 9:32 and I'm feeling really awkward just sitting there in front of the camera, I think I'm going to get going. We have about 70 participants, which is pretty much what we expected. So I think we've got a full house. And before we get going, or to get going, I'm going to turn it over to Nicholas Payne.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say welcome on behalf of Opera Europa to this meeting, which of course should have taken place in Zagreb. But we're very grateful to Chris Denby for making his presentation in this way, as some kind of recompense for not being able to gather together in Zagreb, something which we still hope to do next September, 24 to 26, all being well. But now over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Nicholas. First of all, I am incredibly grateful to Nicholas and to Opera Europa for inviting us to do this to begin with. I would much have preferred to be in front of all of you in person and to be able to meet you all and to be in Zagreb in that beautiful opera house there. So, but this will have to do in this new reality that we're all living in these days. So it's great to have you on. I really appreciate you making the time to be with us at this really crazy time that we are all living. We have organizations on this call from lots and lots of different countries, which is incredibly exciting. We look forward to hearing from you across the next 90 minutes or so that we're going to have together. And we will try to make it as interactive as one possibly can, given the circumstances. But again, this isn't even a full list of everyone who is on the call today. It's just exciting to have such a cross-section of the opera world join us. So we're very, very grateful. And of course, I look forward very much to meeting you in person in September. I'm going to be an optimist and say this will definitely be happening, and we'll be having a lot of fun together when we get together at that point in time. So with that, I'm gonna open up, of course, again, by reiterating my welcome to all of you, but also wanted to briefly introduce ourselves so that you have a little bit of a sense for who is speaking to you today. We're gonna have three speakers across the course of these 90 minutes together. I am Chris Denby. I'm the founder and CEO of the Advisory Board for the Arts, which is a new research and consulting firm that was started less than a year ago now, on the heels of about 40 years of experience doing something very similar for other sectors, for the healthcare industry, for the education industry, and for the corporate world. And we've been adapting the work that we've done over the last 30, 40 years to the world of the arts. And that is why we are here in front of you today, is to share with you some of our initial research that we've been doing on one of the topics that we've been covering for this first year. My background, I was born in Europe, actually, in Brussels, and grew up in Italy and France, but find myself in Washington, D.C. these days. I've been working in consulting for most of my life at McKinsey & Company, and then the Advisory Board Company in the healthcare industry, and decided to create this company because I absolutely love the arts and have since the days of seeing Aida at the Termini di Caracalla in Rome when I was a little kid. So this is about translating that passion to try to be in service to the world of the arts. And I am absolutely thrilled to be doing this and hope to be of value to arts organizations all over the world. Pilar, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for attending this webinar in these uncertain times. Wherever you are, I hope you and your families are safe and the quarantine is doing well. Well, as Chris said, my name is Pilar Cárdenas, and I'm Senior Director for Europe of ABA. As you know, English speakers love acronyms, so Advisory Board for the Arts is ABA for now. So, well, I joined ABA in August 2019, coming from the Reina Sofia School of Music in Madrid. You probably know the Reina Sofia School of Music because you had the chance to work with them through ENOAM, the European network of opera academies. Prior to that, I worked in the university field, and my background is law, and I did a master's degree in arts management at the Bocconi School of Management in Milan. I began our journey in Europe with La Verdi Orchestra. I mean, ABA began our journey with La Verdi Orchestra in Milan. And so far, I was able to have conversations with around 100 arts leaders from more than 20 countries in Europe, which has been a great opportunity to get to know the specificity of every country. My role, therefore, is to expand in Europe our network and to serve our European members and to work for them. And well, Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or late morning, or late day for you. So happy to join you today. I am a researcher at heart and have been a researcher for many years. Began my research career at a sister company to the advisory board and the advisory board for the arts called Corporate Executive Board, now owned by Gardner, and studied mostly the corporate world, and best practices research and analytics and quantitative research there, including in fields like marketing, customer service, sales. Also did a stint in learning and development, and am therefore a big fan of Zoom, and so excited to see us collaborating in virtual ways, even if it is under such terrible circumstances. Hopefully we can show you some of the capabilities of collaborating through technology such as this. In addition to my time at CEB, I also worked in consulting at McKinsey, doing analytics and digital learning and development. On the personal side, I am a lifelong cello and piano player, played in the pit orchestra of several operas, chamber music, musical theater, so grateful to have been with the Advisory Board for the Arts since January, and here today to talk to you in some depth about the research initiative behind the New Loyals topic today.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Pilar. So a little bit of housekeeping here in terms of how this is going to work technically and otherwise. As I said, we have about 90 minutes together, which hopefully will give us plenty of time for questions and for diving deep into the themes of today's work. But there are a number of ways for you to interact with us across this time, and the primary way is through the chat function of Zoom. I see that already many of you have greeted each other on the chat function, so it looks like we've got a lot of people who are already quite familiar with how to do that. If not, take a look for a minute in your at your screen. You should see, for some of you at the bottom, perhaps for some of you at the top, a series of menu items, and one of them is chat. If you click on that, a window will open and it will give you an opportunity to type a message, and that message can be typed to the entirety of the group or to one of us specifically if you would prefer to just communicate to us directly. But I would encourage you to just add comments there in terms of anything that you hear, but also use that as a way to ask questions as we go along. And speaking of questions, we are not going to take questions live in terms of people speaking, simply because of the difficulties of having to manage that across such a large group. So we're going to primarily use the chat function to enable you to ask questions and to make comments, of course, which we value very much. One of the things that we hope to get out of today is your feedback on what we're doing. Our research is ongoing work, and therefore it is really important for us to get the feedback of folks that we are in communication with. So this is one of the ways for us to do that. I will also say that you will see that as to the research that we're presenting today, it is, as I said, in progress. This is part one, if you will. One of the wonderful things about having, well, not one of the wonderful things, a silver lining out of the fact that the actual Zagreb conference got pushed to September is that when we come back to you, we'll be able to show you part two of the work that we're doing on this important topic. So we look forward to that, and therefore your feedback is even more important at this time. For anyone who has not had a chance to practice the chat function, this would be a good time for you to do that. I see many of you are doing that. It's so exciting for me to see folks from Munich and Norway and Austria, Brussels, so many different countries. It's really fun to have everyone virtually together here, bringing the world together, if you will. Particularly at this time, it's an exciting feeling to have, to see so many folks. And our hearts go out in particular to our colleagues in Italy who have suffered so much over these last few weeks. So with that, I think I have covered everything that I needed to. I guess one other last bit of housekeeping is simply that I think many of you know from the communication from Opera Europa that we've made these slides available to you on our website. So if you have any technical difficulty seeing them across the presentation, you can download them. And you can, of course, afterwards as well from our website, if you look at the link that was provided to you in the communication from Opera Europa. So that's available as well. We have some video components to the presentations that we're hoping is gonna work just fine. But if they don't, you'll know that they are embedded in the video presentation that you can download from our website. So with that, we're going to get going in earnest. And because we are a research organization and because our focus is the world, it is incredibly important for us that whatever we do is felt to be very, very global and relevant all across the world. As we created this company, it was incredibly important to me and to my colleagues that what we're doing is in fact creating a network of intellectual capital, a network of ideas from all across the world. So what you will hear from us today is work that has been informed by discussions with well over 200 arts leaders from well over 30 countries around the world and representing every continent out there. And we are going to continue to expand that. Part of what we want to bring to the table to you is an ability to open up the world on any issue, any topic, any initiative that we are taking on. Essentially, our value proposition is to have a 360-degree visibility into everything that is going on all around the world on any particular topic. And that's what we hope to bring to the table as we talk to you across this time today. Of course, the world right now, how does one describe it? What we're going through at the moment is overwhelming. It is unique. It gives us a completely new way of thinking about the world. It gives us opportunity, sadness, difficulty, fear, all of the above. And I think we are all individually in our own roles, in our own lives as individuals, trying to cope with all of that and figure out how to dig out of the extraordinary amount of confusion that is going on right now. And we have been spending an inordinate amount of our time over the last 3 weeks, basically shifting our mindset, just like everyone else, about what is going on for the world of the arts. And what does it mean? What does these events actually mean? And how do we get out of this? Because the moment that we start to see the other side of the curve, we will begin to think about the future. And it is our belief that, however, that future has to begin today, that we must begin to think about what happens when our websites no longer say things like Carmen canceled, but instead Carmen reopening or Teatro La Fenice reopening. Those are the things that we are all looking forward to, of course. We don't yet know when it's going to be, and that is part of the uncertainty. And one of the things we do is to try to provide some visibility as much as possible into how do we even conceive of when the world will reopen. So I'm curious to hear from this group, actually, what is your thinking about that, just as a way of kind of getting the conversation going? When do you expect your doors to reopen? What would be your best guess? So let's take a minute to just get your answers and see what people on this call think. And you'll be able to see everybody's perspective on that as we deal with this incredible amount of uncertainty. I see we have a few optimists in the room. We have a few realists in our virtual room.
They won't be able to see it until we end it, so we're able to see how it's going. But I'll let a few more queue up, and then we'll show it to everyone.
All right, so we'll have a big reveal in just a second as to what this room feels in terms of their perspective. It looks like most people have voted. There are a handful left, so we'll give you a few more seconds to think about.
Chris, there is a question. Rick is asking something.
He wants to know.
That's a good question, Rick. The question you're asking about, do we mean business operations or performances? I guess I was asking more, when are you going to be able to start doing performances again? So when will your halls, to the extent that everybody here has halls, actually reopen?
I'll go ahead and close the poll here, and we can share our results.
So the majority, or at least the largest set, believe that this will be September, but there's still a very wide range of perspectives, which may have to do with where you are in the world or your particular countries, what your governments may have told. I think, you know, one takeaway is it's still pretty far away from where we are today. But it's the other takeaway is there's a huge amount of uncertainty, right? And it's kind of all over the map in terms of what people think and what people might be expecting from a planning standpoint. One of the things that we've been monitoring very closely is what is happening in those places in the world that are farthest along. So I'll tell you in a minute that we're hosting a webinar on Tuesday of next week with two of our colleagues in China and Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Ballet and the Tianjin Juilliard School, to get a sense from them, who are obviously farthest along, how long did it take? And are they actually reopening? And what does that reopening look like? And any of you who's interested is more than happy to have you join us for that webinar next Tuesday, which is at 4 p.m. Central European time. But we will hear from them that things are starting to happen, that restaurants have reopened, that there is life again, but that performance halls have not yet reopened. They are expecting, for instance, in Hong Kong, for that reopening to occur at the end of April, potentially not until the beginning of May, which will have meant for them a sort of start to finish of about 4 months, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about and what we're looking at here. And based on these responses, it looks like we have, again, you know, presuming most European halls ended or closed in March, that we're probably talking about, you know, based on people's perspectives, I'm doing the math here, March, April, May, June, July, you know, 5-6 months is what people are saying in general here in terms of the closure. So we'll see how much closer we'll be to what's going on or seems to be going on in Asia versus perhaps what the expectations here are. I think just one word, I talked about resources that we want to make available. We created a major initiative on our end called the Arts Resilience Center, which you can access on our website, advisoryboardarts.com or advisoryarts.com to be sort of on the shorter end. And what we're doing here is trying to pivot all of our work, all of our resources to supporting arts organizations through this crisis. And we have organized it around short-term resources, medium-term, long-term, and I'll talk some more about that in a minute. Karen, I'm still seeing the poll on my screen. I'm not sure if that's the case with everyone. I think we can probably remove it now.
You can close it.
So the thinking that I wanted to share with you is that anybody on this call can access the resources on our Arts Resilience Center. And in there, for instance, is a webinar series that's on hot topics having to do with the crisis. There are tools to help with scenario planning around how do you create scenarios to help you think about your next few months. So I would encourage you to take a look there, because although a lot of what we do is for our members, we've been trying to make as much as possible available to the broader arts world in general. So again, if you are looking for resources to help you through this crisis, take a look here, and hopefully we'll be able to assist you in one way or another. We need to turn now to what we have been thinking in terms of our own research about how to recover from the crisis. And you'll see that this will get us to our topic of the day. The way we've been thinking about this balance of 2020 and the framework that we've created and are beginning to use with our members is that of what we're calling the resilience framework. You know, how do you rebuild resilience in our organizations? Right now, we're at a point where I think all of us, whether we are the Metropolitan Opera or the smallest, traveling opera company in the world, are feeling very fragile, right? We are concerned about, can we even emerge from this crisis? What are we going to have to do? So we're operating in what we'll call a first horizon of rapid response. And the primary priority of this rapid response that needs to happen is operational triage, right? We've got to decide all the operational components that have to do with just being able to get through the next few months until any sense of normality returns. And in our minds, that is a gigantic task just to make a little bit of progress. And it has to do with everything that we are dealing with. So even though we are closed as arts organizations, the work is definitely not stopping. In fact, the work is probably overwhelming at this point in terms of everything from trying to think about our reopening strategy to figuring out how do we get cash bursts to help us manage through the cash flow of the next few months. Very important to think about how you engage with your audience during this period of time. And we'll come back to that. There's a really important point there. Staff safety, of course, funder engagement, whether it's government funding or corporate funding or foundation funding, how you manage your relationships and manage to, as quickly as possible, get the relief that you need. All of those are the tactics that every one of you should be focused on right now. And it can't be one over the other. Unfortunately, it has to be all of those things that will help us get from that fragile stage to the second horizon, which will and hopefully help us return to being in a sustenance mode. In our minds, what is critical here for you as you try to get through past the rapid response stage is to almost create a one-year strategic plan for the organization. And that strategic plan has to have detailed road mapping. How are we going to recover? What is our roadmap? It should look the way a 5-year strategic plan looks, except it's about every aspect of how you get through this next year. And that road mapping can begin today, right away. And it should, in fact. One of the things that you'll hear us talk about is that in this moment in time, you have to operate across not one, but 3 horizons. So you need to think about the medium term as well as the long term while you are taking care of Horizon 1. Because whether business operations or the halls reopen in June or September, there is a moment in time opportunity now to be focusing on Horizon 2, and then the third horizon, which in our mind is where you get from being able to return from sustenance to being a thriving arts organization, which is what every one of us should be working towards with optimism, is to get past the crisis, back to a sustainable place, but then refocus really quickly on how we can be thriving. And in our minds, thriving means rebuilding structural resilience. And there are 3 critical elements that every organization, whether it is an opera company or a ballet company or a theater, should be thinking about right now, which is rebuilding long-term audience. So it's not just about securing your existing audience, which is a key priority as well, but it's about thinking right now about the things you can do to rebuild the audience for the long term. That's pillar number 1. Pillar number 2 is your donor base, which obviously is something that is incredibly important. And whether that donor base is ensuring a reduce the level of decline in government funding, which so many European countries are concerned and arts organizations are concerned about the long-term trend there. As we talk to arts leaders, whether it's in Sweden or in Switzerland or in the UK, again and again we hear the same thing. We are concerned about the long-term trend of government funding of the arts, and we do not have the culture here in Europe of private giving that arts organizations have in the US. So how are we going to make that bridge? It is possible, speculating here, that the current crisis may lead governments to perhaps reduce the level of decline in government funding to the arts. We'll see. It is possible that that is one positive outcome long-term that comes out of this, because they've seen the importance of the arts to us as a culture, as a society, because they've seen the fragility that occurs if the government funding is not there. Who knows? If we look for silver lining, that is one that we can perhaps think about. But regardless, thinking about the long-term picture on the donor front, meaning the general fundraising front, is critical. And then the third pillar in our minds of this resilience framework in the third horizon is reinventing the model. There is no better time than this one to be asking ourselves big questions. I have spoken to CEOs of arts organizations across the world who are now asking the big questions that perhaps they weren't willing to ask themselves 3 months ago. Should we merge with another organization? Should we rethink our model? Should we do things completely differently? This is the time to be going back to that list of big ideas that were too hard to tackle in the past and say, maybe this is the time. Maybe this is the time that we should be thinking about this and thinking big picture. So it was important for me to communicate this framework to all of you, because hopefully there's some value in that to you and to your colleagues in each of your opera companies in terms of what are you doing right now. And what we're doing with our members is helping them through these three horizons and helping them figure out how to achieve the different things that are on this page. To the extent that any of you want any further information or guidance in terms of any of these things, please let us know, and we're happy to try to help in any way we can, including speaking to a broader group of your colleagues in your organizations about this framework and how to apply it to your own organizations in terms of figuring out a resilience roadmap, if you will, for the next few months. But this then allows me to create the critical linkage to the topic that we're going to spend the remainder of our time on today, which is this piece around rebuilding audiences. We have already, even before all of this was going on, we have been spending the majority of this past year thinking about completely new ways of identifying new loyal customers for the arts, because we've been challenged with this for a long time, and frankly, we have not seen extraordinarily innovative changes and breakthroughs in how to attract new audiences to the arts. Not just people who come once to see Carmen or to see La Traviata or whatever it might be, but people who come and stay and who become the foundation of future thriving opera companies. When we started our work a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, one of the things that we did, as I've been talking about, is speak to hundreds of arts leaders from opera companies, ballet companies, theaters, museums, so on and so forth. And one of our big questions to them was, what are you worried about? What are the things that to you are most important to the future of the arts? And we've been working with a list over time of about 80 different concerns, opportunities, topics, if you will. And it's interesting, what I'm sharing with you here is out of the, 60 to 100 participants that we've had in these conversations, this is what we hear. That the absolute #1 topic all around the world, regardless of who you're talking to, is achieving sustainable audience growth, more than any other issue that organizations face. Now, individual opera companies, individual countries, individual ballet companies, so on and so forth, might have a slightly different perspective. But this one, when we ask them to grade, almost any CEO of any organization anywhere in the world says that maintaining the growth of audiences, not for today, not for next year, but for the long term, is the key issue that they're most interested in and find the most challenging. In fact, if you look at the top 10 issues, 4 of them out of the top 10 have to do in one way or another with this idea of building the next audience, of figuring out where the future customer, if you will, to put it in those terrible terms, is going to come from for what it is that we love and bring to culture and to the arts. So to us, spending a disproportionate amount of our time on helping arts organizations with that number one topic, with that big issue, has been our critical mission really for this past period. So our first year bringing our model to the arts world has been devoted to what we're calling building the next generation. And we have 2 major initiatives that we're working on as we do that. In our minds, this is all about securing the future of the arts, period. And as I said, we are focusing on 2 pillars that we believe to be the most critical pillars. One is audiences, making sure that we are building audiences for the future. And 2, of course, the fundraising piece of this, to make sure that there's enough money in the future to sustain the arts world, even in an environment where our traditional sources of funding are reducing themselves. Today, we're going to focus our attention on that first initiative, the audience piece. And, you know, as we started our work looking at where the potential is to grow audiences for the arts world, particularly ones where, you know, it's most challenging, and frankly, opera is one of those, if not the most challenging. There are many places we could go. You know, one of them would be to say, okay, let's look at our current customers and find new ones that are similar, right? That have similar characteristics. And, you know, that's how we will expand our pool. The problem with that is that in our work, we have found that the characteristics that create loyalty amongst audiences are changing radically. And therefore, trying to find similar audiences to the ones we have now seems like the wrong direction because the characteristics are evolving so quickly. And it's also not the most sustainable way of trying to find new audiences to bring to our programs. So that is not what we're focusing on right now. It is also not necessarily improving the loyalty of our existing customers, which is a perfectly viable strategy and has definitely some very positive aspects to it. The problem is, in our minds, in terms of the future, is that we are all concerned about the aging of our existing audiences. And therefore, even if we improve the loyalty of that audience base, that's not necessarily going to give us the security we need for the long term. And then the third place we could be spending our time on is finding younger, more diverse audiences, which, depending on the country, is a theme that is recurring, right? Oh, well, securing our future is about securing the younger audiences, right? Well, not exactly in our minds. Yes, but in a different way than thinking about it in terms of it's the younger, more diverse audiences that we want to attract. And I'll leave it at that for now because we'll have to go a little bit deeper to explain why it would not be our recommendation to think about it in terms of we want younger audiences. What we are focusing on, what we believe to be the key, is to say, how do we find those new audience members who are going to be both new, but also loyal? And what is it? What are the strategies, the approaches that can help us find them? Are there any out there? That's really our focus here. And it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be really, really hard. I mean, there are a lot of studies out there that sort of tell us, boy, we have a really, big hill to climb. One such study was done in the US, and I know it's very representative of what's going on all around the world, because we're seeing it around the world as well, which looks at, this is the Wallace Foundation in the US, did a study of audiences that looked at the interest in the arts that the general population has. And it looked at two moments in time, 92, 2012. Some of you may be sorely familiar with this study. In opera, they've seen the study showed a 33% decline in interest, even more in ballet, 40%. Frankly, even in the most popular art forms like musical theater, there was a 20% decline in interest in that between 1992 and 2012. Done studies like that in your own markets, but it just points to the challenge of having to work through this in trying to find new audiences. Part of the challenge, and Karen, for some reason, I'm not seeing the slides. I'm not sure if you can get them back going. Here we go.
Yep, I got kicked out for a moment. I'm back now. Apologies.
If we flip, this is another study that looked at one aspect of bringing audiences to an art form. This happens to be for orchestras and symphonies. And this study looked at, and there's a link at the bottom right if any of you at some point are interested in looking at this in more detail. We found it interesting because it was confirming of what many of us know intuitively, that most people are just scared. Right? They're just not me. I hear about people who go to symphony orchestras or opera companies, but it's intimidating. Basically, this cluster of dots here shows the percentage of people who are in what this study called a negative affinity zone. It's not that they have a limited interest or limited feeling of welcome. They have a negative feeling, meaning they are scared. They are, they feel like they're being pushed away, that there's not a welcoming environment. So we just put this out there to say, whatever we do to attract new audiences, and I think we all know this, is super hard. And we've got to overcome these issues. We've got to overcome this. And I think most of what we've tried has not worked incredibly well. So that is why we are trying to think about what can we do that's different in kind. The important thing before we proceed on any effort is to say, is it worth it, right? Or should we simply be trying to do the best we can with what we have? And frankly, many of you are, and very successfully. But the problem is, what does that mean for the long term? Our belief is that it's absolutely worth it. And this is one data point, and yet another study that looked at a general population. And if you look at this data, what it tells you is that traditional visitors to cultural organizations account for about 15% of the total population. So that's, you can think about it as our target audience in general. But the study said there are inactive visitors out there. So what does inactive mean? Inactive are people who don't visit cultural organizations, but have the potential and the interest to do so. So I'll give you an example. In my previous company, we started a affinity group, if you will, to try to get people to go to the opera. And a friend of mine who were subscribers to the Washington National Opera started this group inside the company. The company has about 4,000 people. And we did a special event for I think it was Carmen. And we did, whole campaign inside the company to get people interested. And it turns out we got 250 people to sign up for one night to go and see Carmen. And who were these people? They were people who studied music as a kid, who maybe sang in a choir at some point earlier on in their careers, but for whatever reason, they got busy with other things. They started working. They weren't thinking about it. It wasn't the cool thing to do. They never followed up, right? They never actually ended up going to the opera. But because there was some sort of thing that was created for them, there was some sort of appeal to a particular interest that they had, we were able to attract them out of inactivity to activity. And the point of this study is that those people in the minds of this study represent another 15% of the population. So think about what that means. That is a doubling of the potential market out there for the products that we put out to this particular customer base, if we put it in sort of traditional corporate terms. So the idea is, who are these people? Where are they? That's the key question that we want to try to answer. How do we find and then attract these inactive or potentially even unlikely visitors? So we're going to now turn to that question and how we answer it, because we believe there's a way to do that that is very targeted and that has tremendous potential to bring out individuals who can in fact become both new audiences but also loyal audiences for all of us. Before I turn it over to Karen, who's going to go through that section, I just want to pause for a second and see if anyone has any questions about anything that we've covered so far. I'm going to look at the chat function here. If you have any questions about anything we've covered so far, please type them in and I will address them. And if not, we will keep going with Karen. I'm seeing that people are shy. I must be doing an incredible job of explaining everything. So we will proceed then. I'm going to turn it over to Karen, and we're going to keep going and try to help get you a perspective on how to answer those two fundamental questions.
Excellent. I am happy to talk a little bit more depth about this particular research initiative, and I'll begin with an overview of the research process that we went through. And it'll help put everything in the context that you need to understand some of the details that we're going to go into, including the specifics around a technique that we used that we think is valuable for anyone who is looking to better understand and attract these new loyal audiences. So the first question that we asked ourselves was, what truly motivates buyers? And by that we mean buyers of tickets and audience members. We used a couple of approaches here to understand buyer or audience member motivation in more depth. Much more to come here on the first bullet around the jobs to be done technique that we use to understand audience member motivations. We then translated that into a study of 5,000 plus current buyers, which we are clustering into quantitative behavioral segments. And using advanced analytics to look for segments that are stable across.
I'm going to take back over for a second. Karen, are you back with us? You are on mute, I believe.
Karen?
I am back. I apologize for that. Let me get us back into this.
You stopped once you started.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that it took us 40 minutes to have any sort of technical issues. So.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Excellent. Apologies for that. And let me just make sure that everybody is back in as they should be. Last time I ended up having to add everyone back in. It looks like we are fine.
It appears we're fine.
Someone dropped off.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is what happens when everyone in the world is on Zoom at the same time, and I'm impressed with our abilities at least to get this far. So first question is, what truly motivates buyers? And we did this massive quantitative effort starting with a deep understanding of audiences. We then take that survey and study of 5,000 current audience members and are about to do some analytics modeling to match individuals based on what we know about their behavioral segments to members of the broader population, and build predictive scores for those individuals to help us say how big are these segments in the world at large and in a given region. And in addition to this, we can figure out, which is why we call them the new loyals, which of those segments are the most loyal, the most likely to return. The third question that we ask then is, moving from our quantitative research that helps us have a fundamental set of numbers and confidence through those numbers, is what are the strategies that help us capture those new loyals? And this is where we get into more of our qualitative research, again, after that first phase, where we have been doing interviews with hundreds of organizations. And I should pause here and say we would love to talk to yours at any point to understand your own approach to audience development, some of the successes or failures you may have had and what you have learned from those. That is the qualitative process we go through, and the analysis of these best practices we share back in case studies, implementation guides, and on-site implementation work support for our members. We have a really important partner in the work that we are doing here, and I want to pause a moment to talk about them. They are called Haystack DNA, and you'll see a picture of Obama here on the left, and that is because they, in addition to pioneering the field of predictive analytics, they have worked on Obama's 2008 campaign, micro-targeting, to understand for any individual, how likely are they to vote, which candidate are they likely to vote for, how persuadable might they be, even how much to ask for in donation. This micro-targeting they did in 2008 for Obama, and then more recently for Bernie Sanders in the most recent election that's still going on. And they're experienced in customer analytics for broader than elections, sports, education, et cetera. And we are grateful to be working with them to help us take the data that we have about any individual and really be able to take and give us a broader perspective for what that might mean for that next ring, as Chris mentioned, of the new loyal audiences that we can find. So back to the research question at hand, how can we understand who buys tickets to better understand how to get them to do it more often? To do that, first question we might ask is who buys these tickets? And what we typically say in answer to this question is here on the left. As arts organizations, what we most typically have at hand as we think about our targeting and encouraging new loyal members to join our audience is demographics, things like their age, their ethnicity we might know, their income, and we'll use this information to target. Sometimes we might have a little bit more. We might be looking more closely at arts purchase behaviors, like their frequency of purchase, the price they paid, the amount of time that it's been since their last purchase. And sometimes we have a basic understanding, particularly here, about their attitudes, interests, and lifestyle. Sometimes, you know, we say, well, what do millennial attitudes like? What are they like towards the arts? What are their lifestyle? What are the flexibility that they need? And when we do this, we end up with a picture like this. Let's introduce Ileana. She's 35 years old. She has a middle-class income, and she has an advanced degree. Now, seems like we know a lot about Ileana, but in some ways it's really hard for us to act on this just because of her demographic characteristics. Knowing that she is 35 years old and has a degree, we don't necessarily know what would motivate her to attend an arts performance. And we know there's something that does motivate her, and it feels like it can be really hard to know what this is. But luckily, there are some good techniques to help. And for that, we need to talk about some Harvard professors. As a Harvard professor named Ted Levitt famously said, people don't buy quarter-inch drills, they buy quarter-inch holes. Another professor, his name is Clay Christensen, most famously known for The Innovator's Dilemma, said the following: after decades of watching great companies fail, we've come to the conclusion that what they really need to hone in on is the progress the customer is trying to make in a given circumstance. This is what we've called the job to be done. Looking at these two quotes together, the idea is that when you ask a customer what they want, they will say a 1/4-inch drill, but what they really need is a 1/4-inch hole. How do you get to that understanding of what is the hole that they're looking for? And the answer is by looking at the progress they're trying to make. And that is in a nutshell, this jobs to be done technique that helps to surface those needs that people have such a hard time articulating. It's a very practical methodology that helps you get beneath what a customer was likely to tell you and into what they really need. And then it allows you to do things like segmentation focused on those customer motivations. And most importantly for us as arts organizations, it is a way to spark actionable innovation so we can bring in these audiences we've been trying to capture for so long with new methods. Now, rather than me tell you more about jobs to be done, I'd love to show an example. And boy, are we really going to test the methods of Zoom here, because I am going to show a video. I'll apologize in advance for some of the video quality issues that you may see, but you should be able to hear just fine. And I would love to show you Clay Christensen himself talking about a very specific example of how to understand the job to be done, because I feel like it really brings it home. So let me see how well this works. Pilar, Chris, let me know if you're having any trouble hearing, and I'll try to make a change.
We decided that the way we teach marketing is at the core of what makes motivation difficult to achieve. The most helpful way we've thought of it so far is that we actually hire products to do things for us. And understanding what job we have to do in our lives for which we would hire a product is really the key to cracking this problem of motivating customers to buy what we're offering. So I wanted just to tell you a story about a project we did for one of the big fast food restaurants. They were trying to goose up the sales of their milkshakes. They had just studied this problem up the gazoo. They brought in customers who fit the profile of the quintessential milkshake consumer. And they'd give them samples and ask, could you tell us how we can improve our milkshakes so you'd buy more of them? Do you want it chocolatey or cheaper, chunky or chewy? They get very clear feedback. They would then improve the milkshake on those dimensions, and it had no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So one of our colleagues went in with a different question on his mind, and that was, I wonder what job arises in people's lives that cause them to come to this restaurant to hire a milkshake. So we stood in a restaurant for 18 hours one day and just took very careful data. What time did they buy these milkshakes? What were they wearing? Were they alone? Did they buy other food with it? Did they eat it in the restaurant or drive off with it? It turned out that nearly half of the milkshakes were sold before 8 o'clock in the morning. The people who bought them were always alone. It was the only thing they bought, and they all got in the car and drove off with it. So to figure out what job they were trying to hire it to do, we came back the next day and stood outside the restaurant so we could confront these folks as they left, milkshake in hand. And in language that they could understand, we essentially asked, excuse me, please, but I got to sort this puzzle out. What job were you trying to do for yourself that caused you to come here and hire that milkshake? And they'd struggle to answer, so we'd then help them by asking other questions like, well, think about the last time you were in the same situation needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come here to hire a milkshake. What did you hire? And then as we put all of their answers together, it became clear that they all had the same job to do in the morning, and that is they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to do while they drove to keep the commute interesting. One hand had to be on the wheel, but somebody had given them another hand and there wasn't anything in it. And they just needed something to do while they drove. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock. So they also wanted something that would just go down there and stay for their morning. Good question. What do I hire when I do this job? Well, you know, I've never framed the question that way before, but last Friday I hired a banana to do the job. Take my word for it, never hire bananas. They're gone in 3 minutes, you're hungry by 7:30. If you promise not to tell my wife, I probably hire donuts twice a week, but they don't do it well either. They're gone fast, they crumb all over my clothes, they get my fingers gooey. Sometimes I hire bagels, but as you know, they're so dry and tasteless. Then I have to steer the car with my knees while I'm putting jam on them, and then if the phone rings, we got a crisis. I remember I hired a Snickers bar once, but I felt so guilty I've never hired Snickers again. Let me tell you, when I come here and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it easily takes me 20 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. Who cares what the ingredients are? I don't. All I know is I'm full all morning and it fits right here in my cup holder. Well, it turns out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors, which in the customer's minds are not Burger King milkshakes, but it's bananas, donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, coffee, and so on. But I hope you can see how, if you understand the job, how to improve the product becomes just obvious.
Great. So let me go back to our slides themselves. I love that example of understanding the job and the milkshakes. It makes very clear a couple of important points. First and foremost, that customers won't tell you what it is that they need, and you need to use special techniques such as this one to get underneath it. Second, when you do understand the job someone has hired something for, it allows you to have a broader scope of how you might innovate. So here's a quick summary on this page for those who couldn't hear very well or had any trouble with the video. While a traditional research would say, you know, how should we improve our milkshake, and look at the milkshake characteristics, the jobs to be done helped them understand that the milkshake was keeping them company on this long commute. And it led to a whole new set of potential innovations that they might make, both making them more breakfasty or making it last longer on that commute. So it actually does a better job of satisfying the job that people are hiring it for. And the last point is that it opens up a set of competitors that you didn't appreciate that you had. They were thinking of other milkshakes or maybe even other dessert products, not as other breakfast items or even as a way of keeping people occupied. So by using this technique, you get so many benefits in innovation that helps you unlock new opportunities and better meet these unmet needs or unmet and unarticulated needs that audience members may have. So we've been talking a lot about milkshakes, and let's now switch back to what is much more close to all of our hearts, which is the arts. As it happened, we use this technique, as we mentioned earlier, of jobs to be done with a bunch of arts attendees, people who maybe had gone many times and some who had gone just once. Maybe they were outer ring. Maybe they'd been dragged along by a family member kicking and screaming, but they still went. And we dug into what they hired that performance to do for them. We did it with dozens of people. As Clay Christensen in the video mentioned, you have to really get into all of the details of how they were thinking. Each step, you almost ask them, like you're filming a documentary, ask them to walk you through step by step. But going through this process allowed us to understand more about what would be some of the jobs that people are trying to achieve in the arts. And we're going to show you a set of those that we uncovered. And perhaps when you see these, it is no surprise, but it is notable that the relationship of these jobs is to the arts and to what's on stage may vary widely. So here's a long list of them, 26 of, and we had even more, but we put a sampling here. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to use the chat pod just to help us understand and bring this home for you, which of these jobs you think your audience members are already using the performances that you offer to achieve. Let's highlight a few of them as I do that, as you're thinking about it. So the first one is very closely connected to what's on stage. That's to see art performed at the highest level. And that is a deep and fundamental job that we have to imagine many of our arts attendees are using. But another one here closer to the middle is keeping the arts healthy in my region. One job people have is they want to be to live in a place that has a vibrant art environment. Continuing or passing on a tradition is another job we heard along the way. It is less around any individual performance and more about the tradition that going to performances means to someone's family. Being in the company of other town elders, this is one of those that's particularly hard for people to articulate, but maybe just as important is being seen with others who feel like they are good company for you. And last, farthest from the performance on stage, but still a very valid job, is getting to know the real city. And going to the opera in the city is part of that experience of potentially being a tourist or being someone who lives there. So I'll pause here and ask us to use the chat again. And as you look at these, which ones do you think are most commonly used for your for your arts attendees, for your audience members? I would love to test out the chat pod if people can, even if you're not sure what this is. I want to make sure we haven't had any technical challenges. So if you can just type one of these in so that we know that you can hear us okay, that would be great. Ah, there we go. Number 1, be in the company of town elders. I got one. 2 and 4, challenge myself intellectually, emotionally, and perhaps morally. Especially these days, that feels like it could be a really salient job for people as they want to have a meaningful, transformative experience is another one. In fact, interestingly, we may see some of these rise in importance as people go through challenges in their lives. They are maybe more drawn to a transformative or meaningful experience. Wow, we're getting a good list of people and really helpful for us to see a lot of ones, as we might have imagined, even a lot of them very deeply connected to the performance on stage, but some appreciating the ones that can be more tangentially related to the arts. Well, thank you for also reassuring me that you can hear us fine. So I'd love to bring this one more step personalized and bring some faces to the names of the people that we spoke with in our jobs to be done interviews. These are real examples, although not their real names. And for each of these 4 individuals, we asked a little bit about their arts background, and we can talk to you about the job that they are trying to get done with performances that they've attended. So let's look at Min. She was a musician since childhood, and for her, the arts forces time on her calendar. A busy doctor, she found it a challenge to get away. And since she was a musician, she really appreciates going to the arts as a way to get her out of the office. And her job was to support community cultural institutions. Let's look at Scott. He has a music theory degree and remembers fondly attending the Nutcracker with his parents and his kids, and now with his kids. So for him, that job is carrying on a family or cultural tradition. Karima, much less frequent attendee of the arts, went for the first time to a 4-hour opera. And for her, she found this to be a cultural rite of passage. She found that she actually talked about wanting to have that Pretty Women moment from the movie Pretty Women, where Julia Roberts was so excited, leaning forward, watching an opera. She felt like this was a cultural rite of passage. And then Ilse, who frequently attends musical theater with her family, for her, it is having a transformative experience. She talked about how she rarely cries, but she cries when she goes to musical theater, and it's a deeply transformative experience. So this exposes the breadth of jobs that are being done by arts performances, but also, and even more interesting to me, is the substitutes that they gave us when we talked to them about the job, and what would they have done if they hadn't been to the performance they went to. For Min, who wants to support community cultural institutions, it was a hiking club membership, the Appalachian Trail Club in the Northeast for her. For Scott, it would have been a holiday gathering at a vacation home. For Karima, the idea of witnessing the pyramids for the first time. And for Ilse, to have a transformative, heart-touching experience, it would have been to work at a dog shelter. You can see this is a very different set of substitutes than we might normally consider. And when we put our arts performances up against these alternatives, it gives you a much broader understanding of what it is that you might do to satisfy that job. Now, these are 4 individuals that we talked to, and we showed a broad range of the jobs that we revealed. That broad range is not very actionable. So what we are doing in our research is some machine learning and data analytics to help us cluster all of those varied jobs into ones that maybe co-present, and certainly help us understand a little bit more about the people who are trying to perform those jobs. So one cluster might be, and I should pause here and say that we haven't yet done this analysis, so this is just a guess here on this page. We anticipate it'll look something like this, but we're going to run the proper analysis in the next few weeks. But imagining one cluster here might be people who want to challenge themselves and see a favorite composer or choreographer. A second one might be keeping the arts healthy in the region, enabling the arts as a conscience of society. A third is passing on a tradition, as we talked about already, connecting with family, reliving fond memories. These may indeed come together. And last, but certainly not least, is one where someone might be trying to experience a rite of passage, earning entry into society and enriching themselves in a new field. You can imagine how they connect together, their relative size, both for each individual institution and for a region as a whole. And we can understand more about the loyalty characteristics of each of these clusters. Are people who are going to see something new and edgy less, and their favorite composer, are they less frequent attenders, less likely to be donors, for example, than those who are in cluster 2? These are things that our quantitative analysis will allow us to do. And what that gets us, when we have completed it, is, you can see here the cluster itself, a deeper understanding of each of the individuals who we invite into our organization. So let's come back to Ilyana, who we met earlier. what we knew about her before was so minimal. It was her age and a little bit about her educational background. Now you can see we know much more. As it happens, Ileana is one of the people we interviewed. We know she's new to country. She views classical music as a secret handshake for entry into society, and she wants to know how to distinguish good from great. But knowing that she's part of this cluster of arts initiatives allows us to think about what are some ways that we could help Ileana meet her job even better. And we want to think about that very broadly across the spectrum of her purchase experience all the way through the experience of the performance itself and the follow-up. So here again, I would love to get some thoughts from all of you. As you imagine Ileana, who views classical music as a secret handshake for entry into society, how might we think of some sample strategies and practices for people like her? How might we think about targeting or messaging or supporting the purchase experience or helping her prepare or that experience itself in the moment of the performance or even the follow-up? What are some things we might do differently? Go ahead and type that into the chat pod. I'll share some of the examples we have here while you do that. So targeting, we know that she's an arts initiative. This one's a fairly straightforward one. We want to target people who are new to the arts, specifically as a group, focusing more in our targeting on the fact that they are new than perhaps on the performance details itself, which would be hard for them to understand. And how would we target someone who is new to the arts in a different way? For messaging, we want to communicate that exclusivity and accessibility. And by the way, feel free to add in your own into the chat pod. For purchase, right, we can imagine designing a landing page for initiates that directs them to the right events and helps them understand the handshake, this secret, help them feel like they belong once they have attended. Of course, we want to educate them on etiquette, history, and program content, but also might create some social messaging that they can use to have some other initiates join and have a group experience. For the experience itself, an initiates brochure infographic would be helpful. And certainly in follow-up, we want to highlight what they might have learned and opportunities for upcoming events. Now, any one of these is likely something you've thought of doing before for your attendees to the arts. So to me, the most important thing here is we know the job that Ileana is trying to do, and we can make sure that that experience, that from targeting all the way through follow-up, actually achieves that job. So rather than having a one-off opportunity with a brochure, but the rest of the experience is puzzling to an arts initiate, we can think about Ileana as having a full experience that meets that need. And we can measure, whenever Ileana comes, is she receiving this kind of experience? So first, we know why we're doing something. And second, we know how to measure whether it is achieving that motivation, because we can say Ileana is part of a known segment. So I'm going to leave you with one more thought. I'm going to skip this video just in the interest of time, and our 5 key lessons, and then I'll move into some of how we can engage on this content moving forward. As we mentioned, we're relatively early in our research process. So the first 2 lessons here come from what Chris was telling us. Sorry, lessons from the research we've done already. First is that we have to remember that sustainable audience growth trumps all other issues in the arts. Especially right now, we should be thinking about how people maybe are considering engaging with us in new ways because they're forced to engage with us in new ways. Can that new mechanism of engaging with our potential audiences help us find lessons for sustainable audience growth in the future? we know the target for our new audiences is at least twice as large as our current audience, based on that research that we saw. We understand that the key to attracting and retaining those new audience is not their demographics. People don't go because of their demographics. It's their motivations. Those motivations are much harder to tease out than it appears. An audience member will tell you that they want a drill when in fact they need a hole. And yet with some techniques, we can really get underneath those and understand them. And when we do, the value of understanding those audience motivations comes in being able to dramatically redesign all aspects of the audience experience and be cohesive in what that experience looks like to make sure that it achieves that job and makes people more likely to come. So last thing before I hand it over to Pilar is that we would love to engage with you more on this research, and I'll be very specific about how you can do it. So the first and easiest way to engage with us on this research is to sign up to be updated on the next phase of this work. We are going to have at least 2 more readouts of sorts. So the first will be when we do our quantitative analysis of the size and characteristics of each of those clusters. And then we will have, as we mentioned, the best practices, tools, and templates to help people act upon the findings from that research. So we would love to let you know more about what we've learned in this process so that you can use it in your own organization. The next 2 are more for our members, but let you know what kinds of things we'll be doing, and we'd be happy to welcome you into our membership to do these as well. The first is we can help you conduct your own jobs to be done analysis. And the second is we can run your data, compliant of course with the GDPR in Europe, through our system to identify your new loyals, help you understand which segments work best in your own organization, how you might want to, which ones you might want to prioritize, and who they are. So really getting down to the individual level in your audience lists. So the way I'm going to collect this, you can see select A, B, and C is open up a quick poll. This should allow us to see which of these you would be interested in. And certainly you have no requirement to answer if none of the above is true. But if you would like to be updated on next phases of work, we should be able to capture your username from this and follow up with you through Opera Europa. I'll give this just a moment to continue to queue. Maybe for the interest of time, while people are filling out this poll, Pilar, I'm happy to hand things over to you, and you can continue to talk a little bit more about, oh, actually I realized, sorry, there's one thing we need to do first, which is I'm happy, of course, to answer any questions you have about the research at any point. But particularly now. So we'll pause both for the poll and for any questions you might have about the research process we went through, the jobs to be done methodology, the clustering that we will be doing, or the best practices and innovation examples that we will be highlighting. So there is one question that came through to me around those 5,000 participants in our research initiative. They wanted to know where they came from. So they are from all different types of arts organizations. Opera definitely included, also theater, musical theater, ballet, dance, symphony, chamber music, and chorus. So all different types of performances, and then all different regions as well. We are about to launch in Italy. So we will have a global representation in our sample, and the survey is still open. So we will be in additional countries in Europe. All right, it looks like the voting has slowed down, so I will hand things over to you, Pilar, and and close out the poll.
So thank you very much. Audrey from Opera Europa is asking if the recording is going to be available. Yeah, it will be available through Opera Europa, I think. Yes, once we have it, we will let you know. Okay, so I think what we do, so we are out of time. Oh,
Pilar, I think we might be having some problem with your microphone.
yeah. Oh. Hello?
Yes, you're good.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so sorry. So Chris already explained who we are and what we do. So, but however, I'm gonna spend a few minutes explaining a bit more about how we work. We are a membership-based research company. We already mentioned this, and we began our journey almost a year ago. And as you can see, from the very beginning, very prestigious institutions joined us, as Carnegie Hall, Melbourne Symphony, or the Joffrey Ballet. And we are quite happy to have them on board as we would like to have you on board as well. My role in Europe is to expand our network and to be able to serve our European members with pieces of research as the one we have just heard, which I think it's very, well, I think it's a different way to think about how we work as arts institutions. I had the chance to chat with a lot of arts institutions here in Europe, and actually I visited some of your CEOs, and we would love to apply and to customize as much as possible those research to your institutions. Well, can you, Karen, can you go to the next slide? And to the next one, please. Well, we work as trusted advisors. We are like the extension of your staff, and we work for the sustainability of your institution. Institutions get linked to us through a membership, as I already mentioned, and as Chris mentioned already, we study all. We are able to have a 360-degree vision of the industry and of your own institution, and among all them, we were able to point it out 81 challenges the art industry is facing all over the world, and among those topics, our members asked to research 2 of them in this first stage: attendance growth and donor growth. But we are able to tackle more and more topics through the time. Karen, can you go ahead? And well, finally, we will be able to apply, and we would love to apply those findings to your institutions. And well, before I give the floor to Chris again, I would like to point out that that our company is able to bring a very interesting point of view, as we are able to bring the worldwide vision. We are able to find solutions in and out of the industry. We have the expertise to do so due to the expertise of our team that has been applying this research model through other industries, and we are able to apply data analysis, and we have the ability to find solutions and best practices all around the world and across arts. I would love to, well, we are running out of time. I would love to continue this conversation with you. Please feel free to contact me, to ask for more information, to learn more about us, and to access, how to access to our resources. So Chris, would you like to say
yes, thank
bye-bye?
you. Thank you. Just in the last 3 minutes we have together, I want to say a couple of things. First of all, happy to stay on and answer any questions that people might put into the chat room in these last 3 minutes. We would love to hear from you. Our email addresses, all three of us, are at the front of this presentation. So please reach out with any feedback, ideas, questions that you might have, ways in which we can help. Go to our website, advisoryarts.com or advisoryboardarts.com. You will see a lot of resources there available to you to help you with this crisis that is available to everybody. We are here to help. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Join our webinar series, ABA Live, which is every Tuesday morning on the US time, afternoon, Central Time, European. With the next one being Asia reopening, ? On Tuesday of next week. We'd love to have you with us and any of your colleagues that you would like to invite as well. So more information to come on that, but you'll also find it on our website again, advisoryboardarts.com. I want to thank Opera Europa for giving us this opportunity to share with you some of our work. We hope it was useful to you. We look forward to continuing to update you. As I said at the beginning, there is so much that we are doing here. We believe so much in the value of focusing on audiences as the core to not just helping us get out of this crisis, but to achieve that sustainable and thriving status that we are encouraging and hoping every arts organization will get to across the next year. With that, I want to thank my colleagues Karen and Pilar for joining me today. Thank you all for being here. Look forward to hearing from you. And I'll take a look and see if there are any last questions, which doesn't look like there are at this point. We appreciate your feedback for anyone who is able to fill out our closing poll question here. And again, Nicholas and the team from Opera Europa, we are so grateful for the opportunity. It's great to be able to do something virtually, and I look forward to seeing everybody in Zagreb in a few months in a very different world at that point. Thank you all, and good luck with everything.